orderly exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Let's review the decision by the federal government to grant exemption to SMEs, farmers, and some manufacturers as regards the payment of withholding tax. What will be the implication of these for the government as regards the issue of revenue, and what will be the impact of these on the SMEs? And also as regards enhancing economic growth, how will this play out in few months? Let's begin our business of shaping policy in this regard by bringing in our guest. We're being joined by Fidelis Atabo, who is the development economist and banking expert from the Federal University of Lafayette, Nasarawa State. He joins us from Lafayette. Glad to have you join us this morning, Fidelis. Glad to have you join us. Happy birthday. Today is your birthday, so I learned.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's actually my birthday, a very beautiful day for me. And I want to believe it will transcend to what we are going to discuss today to make it a very beautiful economy for the country too. Thank you.
What a special arrangement. So let's consider today's conversation as a gift, or your birthday gift to the nation or to the global world, which is quite interesting. And now let's look at the subject matter here, which is the fact that the federal government has decided to grant exemption to SMEs, to manufacturers. I would like you to talk to us. How do you think this will impact, the present economic situations that these players are in? And what will it turn out to be with this kind of exemption? How do you react to this kind of story?
All right. It's a very interesting decision. Before now, I think the news was brokered by the chairman of Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, Taiwo Oyedele, who made this known for the tax holidays that the president has given to the manufacturers, farmers, and then general MSMEs. This is very crucial because we have been advocating that there should be a critical interplay between fiscal policy and monetary policy. If possible, keep the both of them in the same room so they can be checking on each other as regards the policies they are fashioning and designing for the country to make it effective and efficient. You can see that monetary policy cannot operate independently without fiscal policy. And I think what we are seeing in terms of this tax holiday is coming from the corridor of the fiscal policy. And the essence of this is to be able to align and gauge the capacity of these business players, the farmers, the manufacturers, and the general MSMEs. How can we make them sustainable? How can they be viable? Is it all about mentioning and promoting them on the pages of newspaper, and it does not have a practical approach to solving the issues around them that will make them to be productive and viable? I think this is what the president and the team, they are trying to deviate from this time. It is no longer going to be on the pages of newspaper. Let us draw it down. If actually there's a policy, as you are aware, interest rate has been tightened, which will lead to increase in, interest rate has been increased, which will lead to increase in loans and facilities that businesses will obtain from commercial banks. Then it is actually not supposed to remain at that. Then the fiscal policy will now look at it, okay, the tightening and the increase of interest rate is in the good faith of the economy to control inflation. And then the monetary policy on the other side, the fiscal policy on the other side, we have to look at it from the perspective that, okay, how can we reduce the burden of these business players in the economy? Because these are the players that are responsible for improved GDP of the country. Should we leave them at an increased interest rate, bloated cost of doing business? We will not leave them like that. Let's find some ways to be able to ease up their overhead costs, their cost of doing business. Because as we speak now, it is so difficult to harness. Probably it is so difficult to really run some businesses now because of high cost of doing business, which has been the cry of the MSMEs and the business players. Then now the monetary policy, shifting away from the monetary policy, we have to come to fiscal policy. The fiscal policy will have to reduce that tax burden on these businesses.
Let me come in here. Before we get to some of these critical actions that should be taken by the government, I actually want us to expand the conversation first for our audience to understand. But please permit me to pause you for a while. I'm going to bring in Dr. Emeka Nwabuzor, who is a tax expert here. Today's conversation is getting bigger. He is also a council member, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria. He's a man of many parts, but when it comes to the issue of taxation, he's an expert. Dr. Nwabuzor, glad to have you join us on Learning Extinct this morning.
And happy birthday to Mr. Fidelis. It's nice having you.
Thank you very much, Doc.
Yeah.
We're to create a reunion between two friends, and it's a good one. So it means this conversation is going to be more interesting and it's going to get bigger. So let me start with you, Dr. Nwabuzor, as regards this taxation. You are a tax expert. Now, I want you to make your contribution looking at the part of the government who has done the sacrifice of exempting these SMEs from paying withholding tax. Give us a background to the issue of withholding tax in Nigeria. What will be the impact of these on government revenue? You're aware that the issue of taxation is also a way of bringing in money to the coffers of the government. So now that the federal government has decided to take this decision or go this route, what will be the impact as regards the issue of revenue? Then let's look at the withholding tax system in Nigeria. What are some of the issues that have, come up in recent times as regards the tax system? Please talk to us.
Okay, thank you for having me. Well, let me start with the definition of withholding tax. That will give us an idea on the topic we are discussing. Issue of withholding tax, some argue that it's not a tax, while some actually see it as an advanced tax. But the bottom line is that it is a tax that is deducted at source. It is a form of advanced tax payment, so as to where people will now be brought into taxiness, ensuring tax compliance and at the same time revenue generation for government. So it end up being, it constitutes more or less the part of taxpayers' total tax liability, because it's more or less like additional tax, when you look at it from the global tax payable. So now, if you look at it from the issue of the background of withholding tax in Nigeria, you talk about the fact that this withholding tax was actually introduced in 1977. Like I said, it's an advance payment on specific transactions, and over time, the regime expanded it, which has brought a little bit of kind of ambiguities, some kind of complications, and even compliance burden for businesses, especially the small and medium scale businesses. These issues involve a whole lot of challenges, just like you alluded, and they include unclear regulations, issue of separate tax perceptions, issue of refund difficulties, lack of exemption threshold, and tax inequality. So it's a welcome development. The government has looked at it from this angle, just like Fidelis talked about issue of a fiscal policy, and they have brought some key changes, in this new withholding tax regime. And what are these key changes? It's more or less an exemption for small businesses. The small businesses now, as defined by Section 105 of Companies and Income Tax Act, are now exempted, from withholding tax. And that means that first of all is that the SMEs must have a valid TIN. That is what we call tax identification number. And transactions with 2,000 naira million value, 2 million naira value or less within a calendar month is now exempted. Other unincorporated entities with a turnover threshold similar to the small companies also benefited from these exemptions. So the summary of it is that the new regime simplifies the tax system, reduces compliance burdens, and promote a kind of business-friendly environment, talking about the ease of doing business.
So please permit me to still push this question to you, because that's the second leg of my question, and I think you didn't address that. The issue of revenue for government, the impact of this decision on the revenue for government. I would like you to address that.
Okay, it's like a case of, is it the chick before the egg or the egg before the chick? The issue is that it's going to be, to some extent, is going to be a setback for the government in terms of revenue drive. But if you look at it at the same time, one of my friends talked about issue of taxing poverty. If you look at it from that angle, you find out that the activities of these small businesses is really so insignificant to some extent that they should not be overburdened with all these kind of taxes. Though, like you rightly said, it's going to be a reduction in government revenue, but I don't think it is too material to be able to affect government activity, because if you're looking at expanding the frontiers of economies, allowing these small businesses to grow will more or less, in future, bring them into the tax net and thereby expanding the tax net.
Interesting. Let me get back to Fidelis now. There are some critics who came up with this narrative, because I've read some comments as regards this new decision. There are some who has criticized the federal government for taking this decision at this time. They are of the opinion that this decision should have been taken like a year ago, when the president was quick enough to remove fuel subsidy, which has also created a lot of the aftermath impact on SMEs and manufacturers. Do you think the timing is wrong, or does it matter here since the federal government has taken this decision? And then how do you think the SMEs can take advantage of this kind of decision?
All right, thank you very much. I think the time is actually appropriate, because when you are meeting a system that is actually cloudy, you don't just jump at it and begin to take some certain decisions. You have to study the system, you have to study the economy, you have to study the rudiments before you are able to justify every decision that you embark upon as the president of this country. Because in the end, if it doesn't work, you are the one to blame. That is why it looks as if the decision is coming at this time. Yes, it is coming at this time, and it's going to benefit the affected agents of the economy. Because if you look at developed countries too, like America, they don't joke with their MSMEs. Sometimes they even believe in ideas. In Nigeria, we don't learn based on idea and then proposals. But in America and some other developed countries, that is actually obtainable. The idea you are coming with, is it bankable? Can we take it to the bank? If it is, and it's subjected to test, and it is actually possible, you begin to see that funding will become secondary, and we are yet to get to that stage. That is why at our own stage in Nigeria, lending is to existing businesses that could not really proceed beyond the expected growth that they are supposed to come upon. And that's why every bank you go to, they ask for statement of accounts. Until we strengthen our system, we strengthen our business environment before we'll be able to go beyond that. Then it is the timing, just as we have already said, yes, it's very okay. And just as Dr. Nwabuzor said, I also want to agree with him that the sector they are lending to, the MSMEs, you know, in the medium to long run, they have capacity to do great in terms of contribution to GDP. But between the medium to long run, can they survive it? That is what the decision here is actually trying to resolve. So I look at it, this is what we call trade-off in economics. You know, trade-off. We look at it from the angle of benefit cost analysis. Government is borrowing money, injecting into MSMEs. But if they are overburdened by tax, overburdened by overhead cost of doing business, they will not be able to break even. If they don't break even, how will they be able to pay their taxes? If they don't break even, how will they be able to pay their loans that they've taken from government? You agree with me that those that took some form of facility from CBN in the last administration could not even repay. And the global instruction has been sanctioned on their accounts, and their accounts have been debited. We don't want that kind of incident to happen. Government want to create an enabling environment that will make you to carry out your business, break even, then be able to pay your tax. You can imagine the little funds they are generating or they will be saving from this tax holiday. In the end, they can use it for expansion, they can use it for training, they can use it to embark on additional technology to be able to boost the businesses they are doing. So I think it's actually a very good thing, and it shows that the government cares. You cannot just borrow money from foreign bodies, give it to MSMEs, and you don't create an enabling environment. So it's actually a very beautiful decision to be able to make every 10 kobo spent in this segment of the market to be able to come back for the entrepreneurs and to be able to come back for the government. So the government is bringing everybody into the tax nets, and you discover that by the time the businesses begins to flourish and they begin to pay their tax, government is going to benefit from this in the medium to long run. But in the short run, government is going to lose some money, but it is worth government losing some money because of the substantiated medium to long-term benefit that is embedded in this decision by the government. Thank you.
All right, before we get to what the federal government needs to do to address the issue of cost of doing business, which I know that's what you've raised, and to see how to maximize on this gain, I'll get back to you on that. But let me get back to Dr. Nwabuzor now. Now, you're aware of the role of the Federal Inland Revenue Service. What do you think this agency should do as regards the issue of compliance, to this directive, and also to avoid the issue of abuse? What should be the role of the Federal Inland Revenue Service as regards the issue of compliance, guiding this directive to ensure that there's due compliance?
FRS responsibility has basically been that of, raising assessment and collecting revenue taxes on behalf of the federal government. Be it as it may, they will still continue on their rule. But my immediate concern is the fact that, despite the fact that government have made a pronouncement, I don't know if it has been gazetted, and it's supposed to take effect from the 1st of July. So that will be where they may have implementation problems, where, in terms of implementation, they will begin to argue, has it been gazetted, has it not been gazetted, should it be implemented with effect from 1st of July, or transaction that actually took place before 1st of July. How will they not be able to strike a balance between those transactions that took place before 1st of July, but the payment was actually made after 1st of July? So these are just the little intricacies, but on professional angle, I think they should be able to work around it. All they need to do is to, apply their professional competence in terms of tax collection. It does not change whatever they're already doing. It's just for the fact that they need to shift a little bit of ground in terms of the pressure on these small and medium-scale businesses in terms of withholding tax monitoring that has become more or less one of their fighting tools. So they need to withdraw their sword in terms of that. But that does not stop the fact that they will still continue to collect taxes on behalf of government.
All right, still coming back to you now, Dr. Nwabuzor, still on you now. Now, do you think it would be necessary to have regular audits or assessment of this directive and implementation? And then do you think it's also expedient for the federal government to leave this open for years? Do you think there's a need to have a time frame attached to this directive because of the impact on revenue? What's your take in this regard?
Well, in terms of, okay, now you are talking about in terms of audit and the rest. Now, you need to realize that Nigeria runs what we call self-assessment regime. You are supposed to file your account as it becomes due in terms of your accounting year or your financial period. You're expected to file. It's after your filing that the tax authority will now review what you have filed and, what we call DEX review, and find out whether you have been able to meet up with the minimum requirement for that tax filing. Having said that, on issue of timing, you cannot regularly put a blanket period for which you can say SMEs will grow. It will show in their financials as they are, growing. You will know because their turnover will show. If, for example, an SME is operating today at 10 million naira turnover in a year, and because of these exemptions that have been granted, you will find out maybe after 2 years, their turnover have increased to 25 million. Their bank statement will show. Their financial report will show. They will know that at this point in time, these guys are no longer the SMEs. They are now moving to the big boys in the business circle. And that time they become compliant. Then in terms of issue of review period, this is a continuous process. It's a continuous affair, and because it's a continuous affair, the tax authority cannot lose sight of it. Because if there is no periodic compliance review, it's going to be an issue. For example, if you said it's going to be yearly, which is a welcome idea, but if you leave it to like, okay, we want to do like 3 years, what have happened within that 3 years? What if within the first year, the SMEs have actually crossed the threshold? And by that time, they have not paid taxes. It now become a huge burden for them, because by the time the audit is carried out, they are not only going to pay the taxes that are due, they are not going to pay penalty and interest. Just like I said in one program that the present government is still running what we call a penalty regime, where the interest and penalty will end up becoming even more than the tax liability at the end of the day. So issue of compliance should be something that should be carried out regularly, so that you ensure that the taxpayer is put under checks and balances, as it ought to be, so that they don't run foul of, because nobody wants to pay tax. That's the truth. Even me that is talking here, it's very difficult for people to pay their taxes. So for you now to give them that long window not to comply is going to be an issue. And because that there is that tendency for tax evasion, it is better that there's compliance review or audit consistently. But as for the timing in which these incentives that have been given to them there should not be a blanket timing for it. It should be a continuous affair.
Interesting. Let me get back to Fidelis now. I was almost saying Dr. Fidelis, but maybe that's coming soon. All right. Now, you will observe that if you look at the existing structure as regards SMEs in Nigeria and farmers, most of them belong to the informal sector, meaning that the structures are not that formalized. Now, don't you think this set of people will still be of disadvantage even with this directive? And now let's get back to the question you raised earlier, the cost of doing business. Do you think this directive will make impact on the cost of doing business for these SMEs, for farmers, and even some of these manufacturers?
All right. So the segments we have that are actually informal, I agree with you on that, because virtually, if you could recall, the extension workers in the agri sector were more or less like a place or a unit or a ministry that every graduate may want to work in the past. Because one, they were very effective, they were efficient, they were going around the farms, going around the farm and agricultural practice. They were really inferring workable solutions, and then we saw results in the past. But you can see that has been weakened. So the government really needs to look at that in terms of extension services, agri extension services, to see how they can be empowered to be able to train and retrain the MSMEs along the agricultural sector value chain. Then, aside that also, I will recommend that there should be a PPP arrangement, because government alone cannot achieve it. It's a very huge tax that cannot be achieved by only government. Government should segment each of the businesses, should be put in segments. They should be segmented in a way that, okay, for instance, we are looking at textile, we are looking at agriculture, we are looking at people in the service industry. By the time they have been segmented or categorized, as the case may be, then we can now align them and group them, merge them and hand them over to some of the private firms that will be guiding them in terms of information dissemination, in terms of training, and in terms of new normal practice in each of the segments to ensure that they succeed. Because you can be embarking on this, but farmers, for example, and then maybe people in the transportation sector and all other sectors, they'll be operating with an old model, old practice. They cannot get good results, because government is going to support them. Government is supposed to support them with farm inputs. Since government is supporting them with farm inputs, are they really applying it accordingly to give the expected yield? There are some places where they apply and blend both organic and inorganic fertilizer, which is actually the way to go. Is becoming a modern practice because of the acidic nature of the soil. If you continue to apply only inorganic fertilizer, you are killing the soil. So all this kind of practice will begin to come up alongside the agri and its value chain. Then we now look at other sectors too. So by and large, government is supposed to segment these MSMEs, get in touch with private sectors that can kind of hands-on, to be able to achieve this result. If not, I can assure you that despite government's efforts, some are still likely to fail. But they need guidance and they need to also be followed so that along the line, the success rates will be better than, or will be more reasonable. Let me put it that way. Then on the ease of, the cost of doing business, as you rightly say, yes, it's just like savings they are going to benefit from now. So these savings that they are enjoying now, what they do with it matters a lot. These are some of the sensitization, the private sectors, the PPP arrangement is going to work on it. They need to be trained. The savings they are making now is not just because they'll make it and probably divert it. The savings they are making from this withholding tax is for them to be able to boost the business capacity, to be able to start paying their tax as soon as they cross the threshold where they are supposed to start paying their tax. But if they misuse these savings, you will still discover that when they are going to be charged this withholding tax, they'll be weakened. They will not be able to pay efficiently. But if it is being reinvested in form of capital formation into the business, you see that before they get beyond the threshold where they are supposed to pay withholding tax, they must have increased their capacity. The buffer is there. No matter the shocks, they'll try as much as possible to meet up with their compliance responsibility. So we are seeing that it's an opportunity for MSMEs to develop. If they're able to develop, then you will discover that the growth we are expecting will begin to have it in mileage then as we move from there. Thank you.
All right, let me get back to Dr. Nwabuzor now. For farmers, for manufacturers, and even the SMEs players who are watching this program, I would like you to talk to them. How do you think they can take advantage of this directive to make some gains, to maximize on this directive, to improve production, to also see what they can do to diversify the economy in contribution to that? You agree with me that the SME play a major role when it comes to the contribution to the GDP of Nigeria? Talking about the agri sector, a sensitive one in generating revenue. So talk to farmers, manufacturers, and these players on how they can take advantage of this directive.
Well, the SMEs, the manufacturers, the farmers, the ball is already on their court. Government have done their own bit. And having said that, they should be able to maximize this opportunity that have been given to them, by way of bringing about a boost in investment. These tax exemptions could, bring about an incentive for both local and foreign investment in the key sectors. Which can equally lead to increased production capacity. It can equally bring about job creation and innovation. Then it's like you rightly pointed out, it will bring about a form of economic growth, because enhanced productivity and the competitiveness of in the SMEs, the manufacturing and the agriculture, could equally contribute to the overall economic growth and diversification. Like I equally mentioned, the issue of the job creation. The SMEs, this will bring about a kind of significant employers in Nigeria, because reducing their tax burden will help them to increase their capacity in terms of building capacity and be able to create more jobs for those unemployed set of individuals. Then this will equally help them to improve their compliance. What do I mean by that? Encouraging the formalization through these tax incentives can equally lead to a broader tax base and improve revenue collection, and then reduce the informal sector activities. So basically, it's an open court for them. These are what they have been crying for. First of all, they have talked about the issue of multiplicity of taxes. They have talked about the fact that the SMEs are not allowed to breathe. Now, government are giving them the enabling environment. I believe that with all I have listed, they take advantage of it. Their business will go in for the better.
All right. Fidelis, now looking at the plight of SMEs, small businesses in Nigeria, as regards the business environment, the cost of doing business. In the long run, what will you expect the federal government to do in helping the plight of these small business owners and also to maximize the gains from this directive?
Yes, it's actually very important for governments to be playing the role concurrently with the statements that have been made. And I think it's a very beautiful era for both government and SME. Just as Dr. Nwabuzor said, let the SME breathe. I think the president is a listening president. That is what this depicts. The SME is breathing now, but the president is not going to rest on his paws. The federal government is supposed to keep improving on infrastructural development, most especially as regards transportation. If you look at the logistics costs, it's capable of increasing cost of doing business. The federal government needs to build infrastructures. Look at the bad roads, the railway, the ports, the sea, and then to see how this can be seamlessly transported upon by the agents carrying out these businesses to be able to reduce their logistics costs. You know, sometimes you see that leaving Lagos for places like Abuja, you know, it takes so many days. And if you look at it, you know, the turnaround time is also incorporated into the cost of doing business. So government will need to look at this infrastructural development, you know, to see how this can be improved upon. Then access to finance, you know, government will need to create a very a good niche for them where these SMEs can have access to finance at low interest rates. You know, where they can have interest rates that is reasonable, you know, it will also help them to be able to plunge the money into their businesses. They need to be able to give them the expected yields or return on investments, as the case may be. Then security. Security is actually a very critical challenge in Nigeria now. You and I know, you know, all we have said, for it to come to fruition, government needs to improve on security so that these activities we have been discussing can be seamlessly carried out within the country, and then nobody is being affected security-wise. So if security is not actually being looked into or being improved upon, rather, it's actually going to be another setback for this government effort. So government needs to keep improving on security to make sure it's a safe place for businesses to take place. Then another thing is technology. You know, the invention in technology too. Government needs to also see how some of these technological invention can be carried out, you know, and then by the time this is done, it will improve the way businesses are being carried out in Nigeria here. And finally, agricultural support from the part of government. It is not easy, or it's not over until we are able to also give some of this support to agricultural sector and its value chain, you know, in terms of provision of modern equipment, you know, that will reduce labor, you know, and then be able to produce a high productivity. You know, in terms of inputs too, government needs to also ensure that the right inputs are being given to farmers at affordable price, and then they'll be able to fuse this into the production system so that they will not be able to, so that it will not amount to high cost of doing business. Because you and I know that fertilizer is about 45,000 naira now. In some places, 50,000 naira. NPK, a quality NPK now is between 45 to 50,000. Tell me, how can farmer afford this? Subsidy. Government needs to subsidize this to see how farmers will be able to afford this fertilizer. In all these efforts, if they are being juggled together and support by government, in the medium to long run, we begin to see that government will also begin to benefit from this. So I expect government to stand strongly and be very supportive to ensure that these MSMEs succeed, not just only tax holiday and then probably allowing it to remain on the pages of this paper. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that submission. Dr. Nwabuzor, let me put this to you. I like the fact that you are an expert when it comes to the issue of taxation. What are the critical steps you would expect the federal government to take in addressing some of the tax-related issues that SMEs are battling with? You're aware of what the Taiwo Edele Committee is doing as regards tax reforms and coming up with new policy. Now, what are some of the sensitive issues related to SMEs, manufacturers, and even farmers as regards the issue of taxation that should also be looked into? I would like you to address that.
You know, Fidelis have listed some of them, which involve issue of insecurity. You know, you can see presently now, even the farmers in the north can't even go, not only in the north, even in the south, can't even go to farm because of herdsmen's menace. And you can see recently where they have issues of tomato. Why? Because the farmers had issues. So the government need to look at that, aside from the fact that they have given them incentive.
I hope you can hear me. I wanted you
I
to
can hear you
address
very
the
well.
issue of taxation, not just security. I know you have talked
Okay.
about that. I wanted you to address the issue of taxation, issues related to double taxation, as regards SME and some other issues related to taxation when it comes to small businesses in Nigeria. What other areas do you think this committee should address, and what other issues do you think this committee should address as regards taxation or tax regime for small businesses in Nigeria?
Okay, I will look at it from the issue of the implementation. Because one of the things we face in Nigeria is good policies, but we are faced with implementation issues. Now, what am I talking about in terms of implement? You asked me issue of compliance earlier. That is, first of all, you need to be able to bring out the exemption criteria. The SMEs with annual turnover of below certain threshold should be qualified in terms of the manufacturers, the farmers meeting specific criteria that may make them eligible for those exemptions. Another thing again is you look at the aspect of compliance mechanism. There must be a clear guidelines, which will establish to ensure eligible, properly documented status and transactions to enable them benefit from the tax relief. Then another one again government can do is issue of monitoring and evaluation. They should put in a mechanism for monitoring compliance and evaluating the impact of the policy, which they have already put in place, and equally track progress and make necessary adjustments where it matters most. These are part of things that government can do, to ensure that it's well implemented. Then, aside it, our national tax policy is still not watertight. This is another angle they need, because now on the national level we seem to be getting it, but at the state level and local government level, what is happening? We are talking about the fact now that okay, withholding is taking place. They are giving them exemption. What happens to other taxes that they are being punished with? Some of them, as far as businessman is concerned, even fines and dues are taxes. So, and these things are a huge burden to the business. So the issue of streamlining and going further into tax reform is needful. They have to bring it down to the basis. All other things that brought about bottleneck in businesses, which are related to taxes and fine, should just be simplified. It should not be ambiguous. People should know what to pay, when to pay, and how to pay. It is not a rocket science. So that is probably the thing that government is going to do in terms of making sure that people pay the right taxes and at the right time. Like I initially said, the issue of revenue in the short run will not be much of a problem. If you look at it in the last year, when they implemented the First Finance Act, and they talk about okay, those that are below certain threshold should not be made to pay taxes. There were eyebrow even within the tax administration. They felt that how can they meet up? But our problem in Nigeria today, it is not the tax rates. It is issue of expanding tax net. A lot of people are outside the tax net. Until government expands the tax net, bringing more people into the tax net, then they will get the required revenue. So it's a whole lot of issue of continuous tax reform. We should not be static. We should be flexible and go with the trend and as activities involve. Thank you.
All right, so let's wrap up this conversation by having your closing thought or remarks. So I'm going to start with Fidelis, then I'll get back to you, Dr. Nwabuzor. Now, I want you to talk to business owners in Nigeria. You will agree with me that these are hard times for business owners in Nigeria. What would be your admonition to SMEs, manufacturers, farmers in Nigeria as a result of the economic realities who are going through hard time? What would be your word to them as your closing remark? I would like you to do that in a few seconds, Fidelis. Then I'll get to Dr. Nwabuzor. Over to you, Fidelis.
All right, thank you very much. My words to them is, discipline and then tenacity. They should be resilient in a way. Hard times does not last forever. They should know that, yes, all the efforts being put in place by government, they should maximize it. They should do away with what I call social media criticism or social media economists. This is where they'll project to you that it's actually not working. And meanwhile, it's working somewhere. After governance, after election, and we get to governance, I expect that everybody in the country should start romancing with government to see the kind of benefits, we can have in terms of areas that we can add value. But when we said, okay, we are bringing the political sentiments into some of these businesses, it will not work like that. So I think every business owner should do away with political sentiments, face the business squarely, look at your SWOT analysis, and ensure that you get the expected annual return on investment, and make sure that anywhere you obtain facility, make it serviceable. And then be disciplined, be resilient, and be tenacious. Thank you very much.
Interesting. Dr. Nwabuzor, it's your turn now.
The essence of the withholding tax regime, seeks to enhance tax administration. It seems to stimulate economic growth and also create a more friendly business environment. Now, for government to be able to do it, they need to protect these infant industries. They need to protect the SMEs. Because if we continue on this issue of importation of what we can produce locally, even with incentive, the businesses cannot thrive. So they need to protect these local industries, ensure that what we can produce locally is produced locally without giving them unnecessary competition from the foreign importation. Thank you.
Brilliant. What a way to wrap up this conversation. Gentlemen, I much appreciate you for your time and your thoughts on this subject. And to the man celebrating birthday today, I hope you get your cake across to all of us, including Dr. Nwabuzor.
Yes, I will do.
All right. Thank you so much for your brilliant submissions on this subject. We hope to have this conversation on another time. Dr. Nwabuzor and Fidelis, thank you so much for your time and commitment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice having us here.
All right. What an interesting conversation. It got bigger and better. The conversation became interesting, having two experts to talk about this issue. Earlier, we started the conversation looking at the role of trade services in global trade, and then we dovetailed talking about the partnership between African Development Bank and also the Korea Customs Service. We also dwell on the issue of exemption granted by the federal government as regards withholding tax to SMEs, manufacturers, and farmers. On that note, we just have to call it a wrap on Early Extinct this morning. Don't forget the conversation continues on our social media platform at SOUQ News TV, all our various social media platform. And for those who missed the earlier conversation, you can do a catch-up on our YouTube channel. Just search for SOUQ News TV at SOUQ News TV. There you find us and all the previous episodes of this program. Early Exchange returns tomorrow and will always get bigger and better. I am Femi Ayodele. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.
Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.